Space operas are one of the biggest subgenres of all of science fiction, and that's why I wanted to do my space opera sampler platter. Now, to be honest, trying to categorize all of space operas is almost an impossible task. I'm not up for it. So instead, I decided that in terms of Space Opera September, I would go ahead and give a sampling of space operas that I have read at least one book from to give you a general idea of what is out there and what you can read. Remember that there are so many categories and so many books that I have read that I didn't include on this list just because I don't want it to be forever. So if you're doing Space Opera September with us, thank you so much for joining. And if you haven't, you can still join with the Discord link in the description box down below. Or if it's not September and you just want to read some space opera, let's get to some books. So what I did for this sampler is I divided this into terms of classic and modern science fiction space operas. Remember that my definition for my channel is the dividing line is the 1980s. And that means the first book had to come out in the 1980s or before, then it's classic. If it came out in the 1990s or after, it's modern. I also want to recognize that sometimes space operas can be a little overwhelming to read because they tend to be a ridiculously long series, like 16, 19 books, something like that. And some of us don't have time to read that. And that's why I decided to also further subdivide this category into series that are 3 books or longer, or into standalones or duologies, so 2 books or less, essentially. And hopefully we have a little bit more time for 2 books or less. Now, to start with, let's talk about classics and let's talk about series. One of the biggest classics is definitely Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Come on, you guys knew this one was gonna have to be included, right? The original trilogy is one that I have completed, although I know that there are at least 4 more books. 2 prequels and 2 sequels. It gets very convoluted, I must say. And the original trilogy is definitely worth reading. It was one of my all-time favorite reads this year, and I have to say, the second book is way better than the first. Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy is a big deal because it was the very first one to show a galaxy-spanning human empire. No aliens involved. And what a legacy that has left us with. I mean, oh my gosh, right? Not to mention the fact that the second book is way better than the first book, in my opinion. So I would recommend finishing the entire trilogy. It's definitely a classic space opera read, and you gotta check it out. The next one on this list is gonna be the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. And you guys, the order in which you're supposed to read this series is very complex. What I can tell you is that some of the books in the series are about Cordelia, who eventually has a son named Miles. In my opinion, Miles is the true star of the Vorkosigan Saga, and I would personally recommend skipping any and all books dealing with Cordelia because I didn't like them, and sticking with the books that star Miles. Miles is a one-of-a-kind hero because he was born somewhat malformed, and physically, he is just not up to muster. He constantly is getting sick or hurt or beat up, but he is an incredible genius and he has such a fantastic sense of adventure. I love Miles' character. I love the books following Miles, and quite a few of those books have won Hugo Awards or been nominated for them. So if you're interested in a galaxy-spanning, fantastic space opera, and also following a lovable main character that you're constantly rooting for because he's a natural underdog, this is a series for you. I would probably recommend starting with Warrior's Apprentice. The next series on this list is going to be Deathstalker by Simon Green. I gotta tell you, I got onto this series from Jonathan from Words in Time. He recommended it, and I've had a really good time with this series. It definitely follows a main character on a hero's adventure across the galaxy who's a secret chosen one. It has lots of vibes that remind me of Star Wars, and a smarmy AI character that I have really come to love. So I highly recommend this series if you just want a really good time. I have read the first 2 books of the Deathstalker series and will continue. The next one on this list is by C.J. Cherryh, and really a lot of what she writes could be put on this list, but I haven't got to all of them yet. So I'm going to recommend The Pride of Shanur, which is the first book in the Shanur series. This one is a really interesting one because it's told from the perspective of the aliens looking at human society. An interesting perspective shift and made it a lot more fun of a series. So definitely one that is underrated in my opinion and one that you should consider checking out. The last one on the classic 1980s and before series that I want to include here is The Enderverse by Orson Scott Card. Come on, I know it's popular, I know almost everybody knows about it, but I have to include it here because it really is for a good reason. You have to start with the book Ender's Game, but I would highly recommend continuing on with Ender's perspective into Speaker for the Dead. If, however, you were just so in love with Ender's Game and you want more of those vibes, you could always go into the spin-off series and follow Bean through Ender's Shadow and the spin-off from there. Both of them are well worth the read, so definitely figuring out which character you want to follow and which vibe you want to go with is always a fun one. Now let's talk about the classic standalone or duology books. Now there aren't that many of these, and I haven't read even all of the ones that I could have put on this list, so if you happen to have some recommendations for me, please put it in the comments down below. Otherwise, the 4 I have for you today are The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester. You guys, Alfred Bester is a really big influence into science fiction, and not only is he historically significant, but it's a standalone book, used to be called Tiger Tiger. So if you happen to see that copy, definitely pick it up and know it's the same as Star's My Destination. This book had a lot of intrigue, a lot of mystery. There's a lot of secret powers and running from the law. And this one was a really interesting read. It had a lot of those tropes that we now see in space operas. And so it was some of the originators of those tropes. So definitely check it out and see what he did with those. The next one is going to be a famous classic, and that one is Tau Zero by Paul Anderson. This one is a single standalone book, and for such a short book, it was kind of a slog of a read. There is a lot going on in this book, and some of it is very hard science. So if that's not for you, maybe this book is a skip. However, this book follows a crew of a spaceship that is kind of going out of control and is going faster and faster, which of course, according to time dilation, is not great for the crew, and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. I have to say that this is a book that I'm going to have to reread in the future because a lot of the nitty-gritty details sort of went over my head. The next one is a duology, and that is Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell. So this is a duo of writers who are writing a duology. Mote in God's Eye is a very well-beloved series because of how cool the aliens are. There is first contact as early as chapter 3 in this book. Now, the alien physiology and their society is a particularly interesting one, and it plays a really big role in this book. And I gotta tell you that there were some pretty significant plot holes in this one that got bigger and bigger and bigger as the book went on and made the ending just very lackluster for me. However, it was a book that I would still recommend reading because it was a very interesting alien species, and if you can kind of get over what I couldn't, you might still really enjoy it. The last on the classic standalone or duology list that I can recommend is Babel 17 by Samuel Delany. This book was really almost so complex that it was beyond me. There were areas where I was very confused, but essentially it's a book about how language is almost a weapon. I will kind of leave it here. Samuel Delany does not play around. Now let's talk about some modern space opera books. So let's begin first with series that are books that are 3 or more. So the first one on the list that I want to mention here is going to be one of my all-time favorites. I finished the entire series, and that one is The Bobaverse by Dennis Taylor. This one starts with We Are Legion, We Are Bob, which is a particularly weird title. but it follows a character from the 90s who was, one of those dot-com millionaires where he decides to invest in cryogenically freezing his head if he ever dies. And of course dies on the very next page of chapter 1. And he gets resurrected in the future, but of course we do not have the technology to resurrect a dead body or to give somebody a new one. However, what we did use is the brain patterns of the people who were cryogenically frozen to insert into our AI. So our computers are now kind of run by these people of the past. And that is really where the story takes off. This one is so fun. It has so many heartstrings. There's so much drama. There's a lot of hilarity for people who were born before the 90s, if you appreciate that. And I do think it would be enjoyed by people who are younger as well. So if you haven't read this series, it is a fantastic audiobook. Please go read this one. It is one of my all-time faves. Next is going to be the series Lost Fleet by Jack Campbell. This is a recent find for me, and I have really enjoyed it. It starts with the first book, Dauntless, and it is a 6-book series. There is also a spin-off series, but I don't know anything about that. I can tell you that the initial series follows a character named Jack Black-Geary, who wakes up from centuries ago of getting into this cryogenic escape pod and discovers that he is a celebrated hero for saving his crew. And he has been essentially hero worshipped for the last century and now has to help this lost fleet get home, which is almost an impossible task because of all of the hero worship that they are now expecting him to be able to do miracles. This was such a fun trope. I really enjoyed all the different situations that they put him in. I also really enjoyed how they really talk out all of the military problems and how they try really hard not to fight in this series. I think that that is very unique. This one was just really a lovable main character and a fun adventure. I definitely am on book 4 or 5 of this series. High recommend. The next modern series that I would recommend is by John Scalzi. And we all probably know about the Old Man's War series, so I'm not going to mention that one here, but I think he often gets forgotten that he wrote the Interplanetary series that starts with Collapsing Empire. This is a trilogy that I actually like a little more than Old Man's War. Yeah, I said it. I did. I thought this one was a little bit more interesting because we have a main character who has just inherited the emperorship of an intergalactic system, and as she comes to power, she starts realizing that she has inherited this collapsing empire. It is going down and it's been covered up by so many past emperors that it's almost unfixable at this point. And she's trying to figure out what to do. And it's kind of a setup because, you know, she is supposed to take the fall for all of the past mistakes and all the things that she can do, all the choices she can make. And I really loved the series. I do know that the ending, the third book, was somewhat controversial. So know that it's not something that is for everyone, but I personally enjoyed this trilogy. Next on this one is going to be a recent find, and that one is Ada Hoffman's The Outside. This is another trilogy that has just been completed, and I recently found the first book and fell in love with the world. We have an autistic main character who is a physics genius who has found a way around the regulations that were placed on humanity by their gods and angels, which are sentient AI that humanity has invented and has gone so beyond human comprehension that we now treat them like gods and angels. Kind of convenient and kind of intriguing. Of course, her testing goes a little bit wrong and she has to try to deal with the consequences of the heresy that she committed. What a fun world, what a cool idea. I hope it ends as awesomely as it has started. And the last series on this modern list that I want to include here is going to be the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. I know that this is kind of a Booktube baby series, and I have to tell you that there's a really good reason why. The first book, Empire of Silence, violence begins with our main character, Hadrian, who tells you that at some point in the future, he has been known as the Sun Eater, who has completely eaten the sun and or destroyed it, and the entire solar system that was inhabited with it. So he is telling you his story, and you get to decide whether or not he is the good guy or the bad guy. And this first book was really interesting. It is very much almost a hero's journey. And we get some Roman Empire gladiator vibes with a little bit of Star Wars and some space travel mixed in, and it was really interesting. So gotta say, so far, I really have been liking the first book, and I plan to pick up the second book right after this video comes out. Howling Dark is definitely on my TBR this year. All right, let's talk about some standalone modern space operas. Now, there are so many more than there are classics, or at least the ones that I have read. So the first one that I'm just going to briefly mention here because I'm a huge fan, and that is Cameron Hurley's Star Jar Legion. This is a single book. There is a lot of biotech in this one, and the Star Jar Legion take place in a fleet where the ship is like a biotechnology type ship, and the humans are all female because they're produced by the ship. And they have a very strange symbiotic relationship with the ship, and our main character is having the trope of waking up on the ship and not remembering anything at all. And as she discovers why she's on the ship and why she keeps fighting battles, the deeper we get into this society, the deeper that we get into the mystery of what's going on this ship. While this one was particularly creative and unique, it may not be for everyone, but I was a huge fan, so definitely consider checking it out. The next one on this list is going to be the fan favorite, the Texcalan duology. Both books won the Hugo Awards. It starts with a memory called Empire and finishes with a desolation called Peace. Talk about perfect titling. I mean, come on, Arcady Martin. Oh, perfection. Anyway, this series is a really unique combination of a Byzantine Empire with Aztecs in space. Come on, that sounds fantastic. We follow a main character who is a diplomat who has to not only solve her predecessor's murder, but also has to survive in an atmosphere that is very hostile and politically charged. She can't let on that she has a big secret, and she can't reveal to others what she does or doesn't know. And so she has to pretend through this whole book, and yet still has to try to figure out all of the answers. It is fantastic. I really love this series. If you haven't picked it up, check it out. The next modern one that I don't think gets talked about enough is the Last Watch series. It is a duology, starts with The Last Watch. This was a fun little duology. I felt like I appreciated and approved of the smarmy main character from the very beginning, where a essentially little rich boy gets told to go into the army and gets assigned on the Last Watch, which is kind of like the Wall in Game of Thrones. And he gets sent to the Wall to do his service, and things actually happen that have never happened for centuries. And he has to try to become his own man and sort of redeem himself from his spoiled brat sort of vibe that he's got going on. I really enjoyed this duology, and I kind of hope that it eventually becomes a longer series. We'll see. Next, I would also include Firefall by Peter Watts for those of you out there who are looking for something that are going to blow your mind. This series starts with Blind Sight and finishes with Echopraxia, and it's just a duology. Firefall is the omnibus edition, and it is the series. This one is going to be dark, it's going to be gritty, and that ending will haunt you. It will haunt you. It is stunning and shocking and kind of a little bit terrifying in a weird kind of way. Like, it touches on truth too hard. So if that's not something that you're into, maybe stay away from that. But if you want to be challenged, and if you want a book you're going to think about maybe forever, that would be the book for you. The next one on this list, and potentially last, is going to be the book Stringers. Stringers is a parody slash, I don't know, satire a little bit. It kind of reminds me of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but in space. We have a main character who doesn't feel like he's going to fit into human society, and he happens to know things about biology and bugs that he never learned. And he discovers that he is on a string of consciousnesses, and he gets to know what his previous string knew. And he gets kidnapped by aliens because his string happens to know something very important for the galaxy. I was surprised by the depth of this book, and it is a standalone. I had a really good time with it, and I would highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. And the last little bonus section I wanted to include is 3 particular novellas or novella series for space operas. So I know that not everybody wants to read a series. So consider the Binti trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a little trilogy that you can get in an omnibus edition that has won quite a few awards and is a very fun and interesting and very Afrofuturism little series that is a fantastic space opera if you're not in for a long haul series. The next one on this list is going to be a single standalone, and that is The Light Chaser. This one is by Peter Hamilton and Gareth Powell together, which are 2 authors I have been meaning to read for a long time, but I decided to pick up this novella to try out and see if I liked their writing. And it was a very much interesting mystery. We follow a woman who, in her ship, goes from civilization to civilization, kind of collecting memories. And she uses the memories to sort of entertain herself as she goes through the world century after century due to time dilation, and starts to see some repeated messages specifically to her, which isn't supposed to happen. And that means that somebody knows about her existence. It also means that there's a mystery to be solved. And I really thought this one was a fun one. I think it's a little underrated, and you should definitely check it out if you don't want to do a series and are in for a little bit of a mystery. And last, and definitely not least, is the Murderbot series by Martha Wells. I'm so excited. I learned that there is going to be an 8th and a 9th book planned. We'll see if that continues or if it ends there. But the Murderbot novellas are definitely well worth the read, and follows a AI creature who has a lot of social anxiety and uses soap operas to handle that social anxiety. What a fun idea and a fantastic series. So definitely check those out if you're interested in novellas. And that does it for my space opera sampler. I know this was long, and yet there are so many that I did not mention. You don't even know. I could probably do a part 3, 4, 5, and 6 and still have more to go. So definitely consider starting with some of these. Let me know in the comment section down below which ones you recommend I should pick up, which ones I should continue with, and which ones you want to. Until next time, you guys.